request Ms. Priyanka, C. Priyanka ji, to come on stage and co-host this session with me. Welcome everyone. Uh, so we are starting this session. Sir, my first question would be to Sri Amarjit Singh ji, sir. Sir, it would be great that industry should know about your department and how effective your department helps in ease of doing business.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the question and thank you for having me here. So the question is which department I am from. So I am here as ADG from DGTS, which is Directorate General of Taxpayer Services. So DGTS is a wing of CBIC with a specific mandate of working on taxpayer services. And ease of doing business is nice. Okay. So normally, ease of doing business is understood to have lesser compliances and simplification of rules and laws. But ease of doing business, I think, extends has other aspects also. I would say grievance redressal is one of the very important aspects of ease of doing business. People have grievances which have which speak a lot about the working of the taxation system. So we look after grievance redressal. Second is we carry out a lot of outreach and educational programs. We hold webinars wherein we interact with people from trade and industry, professionals, tax practitioners. Thirdly, we take policy feedback from trade and industry, how policies are working and how they are being affected by them. Another aspect may be that we have a tax facilitation mechanism in the department. We have citizen charter. We have SQMs, which is quality measures, standard quality measures. We have service delivery systems. So we monitor how various commissionerates are working against those service standards, how they are delivering. And time to time we do inspections. And lastly, we engage with the trade and industry just to see the feedback, what is happening on the ground, what challenges are they facing, and how can we bring about more improvement in the system so that we have a better tax administration system, which is responsive, which can be predictable, and which should be fair also. So that's about it.
Sir, since you have spoken about grievance redressal systems, so there's a term which we come across quite often, CP grams. And many taxpayers at times raise grievances on the CP grams portal. And at times what happens is that they, instead of pursuing their remedies, they think that this could have been resolved by CP grams. So I would just seek your thoughts on how to balance in which situation should we go for CP grams and in which situation should we actually proceed on availing our appellate remedies instead of going through the administrative mechanism.
Sure. So the question is very simple, whether I should take a CP gram route or whether should I take statutory appeal.
Normal other appellate mechanism which we could foresee from the statutory system.
Correct. So its answer is very simple. You may ask yourself, whatever issue I am addressing, is it a statutory issue, it is a legal issue, or it is an administrative issue? So just to illustrate, maybe if it is some order, some adjudication order, some appeal, some assessment order, or some interpretation of law, or some demand, some penalty, which is I am agreed by. So CP gram will not help in this case because there are established statutory appellate route. So CP gram will not help. Second category is where some administrative issues such as some refund is not being cleared for held back for long days. Some appellate order which is not being implemented by the department and we don't know what to do. Or I have some grievances, I have my GST, my portal, I have some portal issues which I don't know how to handle. So such issues, of course, there's CP Grant portal route there. And CP Gram, whatever grievance is filed on CP Gram, department monitors very closely each. DGTS is in charge, has been given the responsibility of monitoring all the CP grants at national level. So you can believe me, all the CP grants, we go through all the CP grants every month. All the responses are scrutinized, not only the grievances, but how those grievances have been addressed by the department of officers, how the reply, what reply has been given, is that reply is good enough, it is scrutinized to that level also. And if where the replies are lacking, we actually call for the explanation. So CPGAM is very effective tool as far as these administrative issues are concerned. So I think the distinction is very clear. So one should not confuse between what route I should take. People have maybe a misgiving that because if there is an appeal, there is some limitation active working, 3+1. So if you, there may be a misconception that I have 5 CP grams, so that limitation I can go beyond that. So no, that is not working. You have to have, that route is separate. So you must secure your limitation time period, file your appeal within time, and at the same time you can CP gram. But certainly these are two different domains.
Thank you so much.
I hope that explains.
Yes, that's quite clear, sir. So
Thank you.
thank you so much, sir. So my next question would be to Neeraj, sir. Sir, considering in the previous session we were told about the use of artificial intelligence by the GST department, both in terms of finding out where the fake invoices are there or other aspects are there, or finding out how the risk management is to happen, and at the same time that certain cases have cropped up wherein a fake citation or hallucination has happened. So how do you think that the department is gearing up to balance these aspects and using the artificial intelligence in going forward, sir?
Thank you very much. Now, before taking your question, I'd like to respond to Sir. He had posed a question in the last session about non-effective service of notices and orders, etc. So I wish to bring to your notice that very recently, that is on 21st July, Punjab and Haryana High Court has issued a very detailed order, wherein they have restored all such appeals where the plea was that they had not received the notice wonder how is this happening? How are the availers, the bona fide availers, ending up with these kind of fake invoices? Now on query, on interaction, it was revealed that one, they have no stated procurement policy with sufficient guardrails or precautions prescribed. And the procurement policy is mostly handled by the supply chain experts. They are not the one who are responsible for tax compliance. So there need to be a proper policy in place. That policy needs to have certain guardrails also. And under what circumstances you will accept the invoice and you will not accept an invoice. And if you don't have that, you will have a very confused kind of a situation. And you will be ending up with all these fake invoices, and the department will have a propensity to suggest that maybe you were also involved in the maybe it was at your best this was happening. Now on the use of AI or I would say data mining, we have, in fact, it is very easy for the department to detect fake invoicing. When we drill down, we find taxpayers who have received nothing for their issue, who have received a less quantum of credit. They are usually 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times more than what is there in the books and so on. So that's not a challenge with us at all. And this information is not there with the taxpayer obviously, and it can't be also with the taxpayer. But one part of the story, they can still cross-check or verify whether the taxpayer is active resident and whether they have filed their latest return or not. And if you drill down further, you can ask your supplier to go a level below also and then check their supplier and so on. So at least even if the credit is not available to you because of no tax having been paid, at least the charge of complicity will not arise. That's my short take on the issue of fake agency. There is a lot more to say, but I'll stop here. Thank you.
If I may, sir, can I only continue because I said what you have said. In this trade of fake invoicing, there is one part of this so-called fake invoicing where traders are genuinely buying the metals, plastic industry, metal industry, or real estate, where they buy from agents. Goods are actually from agents. Who will give an invoice is decided by an agent, and agent supplies the invoice along with goods. Now the problem is that the bill is coming from somewhere else, the material is coming from somewhere else.
That's legally inconsistent. Because the one who has supplied the material, he has not given the invoice. He has not paid the tax. One who has not supplied at all, he has issued the invoice. So credit has to or will be treated as illegal. Under any circumstances, and I don't think even the judicial relief will come in such a scenario. That's my opinion.
Thank you so much, sir, for the insight. I will just ask one last question from Mr. Rajat Mittal. Sir, now that we have come to know that GST 80 has already become operational, and so a question that would naturally arise in everyone's mind is that GST 80 does not have a precedence as of now. They do not have any judgments, hardly 9 or 10 judgments have been out as of now, and they're still streamlining as to how to bunch matters to come up with precedents. And the issue remains, what happens to the judgments that were rendered in the erstwhile regime? So, will those judgments continue to hold good, or at best, what could be anticipated is that GST, they would hold a persuasive value, and the GST 80 would go on its own separate venture to develop the precedents. What are your thoughts on this process?
Thank you, Siddharth. First, GST itself is a legislation which is a rehash of a lot of the earlier central excise, the indirect tax regime. It's a rehash of 4 or 5 different laws. Some of the concepts are directly lifted from VAT regime. Some concepts like valuation are lifted directly from the customs and excise. So, and we have established hundreds of at least decades of jurisprudence on the aspects of valuation, on the aspect of all these concepts, which is laid down by the Supreme Court. I don't see that GST, AT, these judgments would definitely be having persuasive value, and they should not be ignored, because those judgments have come at the cost of a lot of arguments in the courts, and the revenue has put it aside, and it's counted by the assessees, and the jurisprudence is developed. There is no reason why we should discard the jurisprudence. They continue to be applicable and binding on the GST appellate authorities if the provision remains substantially similar. However, if there is a change in the law, then obviously you can distinguish, you can distinguish on the point of law. There is the doctrine of stare decisis says that a precedent is on what it is decided and not what it says. So to the extent applicable, GST, AT, or any other tribunal for that matter is bound by the judicial discipline and still should follow the decisions rendered by the Supreme Court and the High Court. Having said that, it also boils down to the will of the tribunal. A lot of times we've seen that, and this is a problem, why GST, AT assumes so much importance is also because of the fact that it is the first forum today which has a judicial member. We've seen in the context of GST, not only GST but across the tax authorities, and it is a real problem that the first appellate authority does not have the power to remand. So the path of least resistance for the GST appellate authority, first appellate authority, is to confirm the remand as a matter of routine. So it also boils down to the fact that what is the will of the GST appellate the tribunal. If there are judicial members on the forum, then I think that the jurisprudence of the laid down by the Supreme Court as well as the High Court will be implemented.
One quick question over and above this. How do you foresee the next decade of tax professionals, considering the evolving use of AI at every stage, and the department also gearing up for those technological advancements?
So, insofar as the use of artificial intelligence in adjudication is concerned, Siddharth, I must tell you, you're aware that Supreme Court recently came up with the draft rules on use of artificial intelligence across the courts in India. While those rules are specifically meant for the courts, they're not meant to be for the quasi-judicial authorities, so whether it is SEBI or CCI or the tax department. But some of the principles that can be borrowed from those draft regulations is that there is a chapter on prohibited and prescribed use of artificial intelligence in adjudication. An adjudicatory function of a court or a tribunal would be something that affects the rights of a litigant. So, one of the prohibited use of artificial intelligence is the Supreme Court itself in its draft regulations clearly said is that in judicial functions, the use of artificial intelligence is a strict no-no. You can use the artificial intelligence only in administrative functions that doesn't determine the rights of the party, and that too with a mandatory human in the loop. Which means, because artificial intelligence, because of the nature of technology itself, has a problem of its own. The problem of explainability, problem of black boxing, and problem of hallucination. And till date, there is no frontier model or any other generative AI which can claim that it is foolproof of this hallucination. So, I would say, although these regulations are not directly applicable to the quasi-judicial authorities like the tax department, but the tax department can use the artificial intelligence only while doing the investigation. The show cause notices and the ASMP 10 discrepancy errors should not be allowed to be converted into tax demands, because that effectively means that because there is a mismatch in the system, a taxpayer fails to respond to that ultimately becomes a tax demand. It affects the rights of the. So basically, what you're doing, you're using machine learning and artificial intelligence in crystallizing a liability on the head of a taxpayer. I personally feel that is the use of artificial intelligence which should not be allowed to be done as per the judicial standards.
I hand over the mic now to Ms. Priyanka.
No, ma'am. So I have one question. First question is for Vani, ma'am. With increasing regulatory scrutiny, data-driven tax administration, and rising litigation, tax risk, and significant impact on organization reputation and financial performance, how important has become a boardroom discussion, and what expectation do board now have from CFOs and tax leaders?
Thank you for the question. I'm audible, right? So let's move on from regulations to tax practitioners to the boardroom management. Where was the policy, the strategy, the discussion, everything is going to actually happen, and which is going to ultimately drive all businesses to ensure that what has been put in by the regulation is being followed in the letter and spirit that it is supposed to be. So to answer your question more specifically, all good companies, small or big, whether they have a board as big as a listed company's board or even private limited company's board, wherever the business and the businessmen, women who are heading the organization are doing it with a focus of doing business ethically, transparently, and effectively. For them, boardroom discussions, business tax provisions, direct as well as indirect, take a very, very important place. Not just as quarterly dashboarding of the financial results and then a small talk about where we stand with the income tax or GST per se. But these organizations understand three things very well. And I sit on a bank's board, I sit on Bandhan Bank, so that's a huge organization. I sit on a listed company, which is just listed barely 4.5, 5 years ago, so it's growing in leverage. I sit on a private limited company, which is a small base at KFC. And I'm speaking from my experience on all three sectors. So we recognize at the board level that there is a complete organizational existence risk now that exists if tax matters are going to be pushed aside and left only for the regulatory compliance angle to be taken care of by some junior level in the organization. There was a time when a certificate from a CFO that we are tax compliant was sufficient for the board to go forward and not talk much about it. There was that time. But now the boards are recognizing four things very, very clearly. One, they recognize that with the advent of digitization, the way it has transformed the entire tax setup or administration in the last 10 years, maybe more, but 10 years particularly, the availability and the transparency that exists with the departments, and not just the tax departments, any regulatory departments, is now extreme. So earlier, even the ethical people knew that the chances of any mistake coming up to the fore was not at the same level of percentage as it is today, because now I think there are hardly any eyes that are on that data. It's being crushed through a digitization analysis process. So one, that recognition exists in every way. Two, every ethical organization that has growth as its main focus does not want any reputational issues coming up. So the moment there are tax issues in direct or indirect fashion, especially in the indirect segment, especially with all this fake invoicing and all this discussion that we've had in the last 1 or 2 forums, they understand the reputational risk of that. They understand the that take care of these things. And then once the risk in the organization vis-a-vis this is assessed, then it's mitigation, how we are ensuring based on our risk appetite, what decisions we are taking, are we legally totally sound, is there a grey area? That is where a lot of organizations are now using AI, not telling us what we are doing right or wrong. We are still leaving that to our auditors. We are still having the statutory and internal auditors coming and telling us more granular details where we need to hear from them. But predictive tools have now also been put into place in many organizations to understand that wherever there is a transaction that can take a grayish connotation, it can be interpreted in two different ways. What is the more prudent way? Is it, yes, a cost-benefit analysis will always be prominent and focused in every business, but is it something there where, for example, I'll give you a proper example of one situation that we faced in one of our courtrooms. There was a transaction on which the implementation of GST, it was a transaction where a company was being purchased and certain payments were to be made in India and abroad. The GST, whether it was going to be paid on that transaction or not, was not a certainty. And despite getting multiple opinions from experts, which the board insisted upon, so that's the cognizance we took, there was still always a rider which said subject to subject to subject. So the board took a cognizant and a very mature decision. They said, let's go ahead and make the tax payment. And then claim that this is not taxable. Give all our legal positions, but not without complying with what can be. Because if I'm getting mixed opinions from the best of the best in the industry, that means there are some interpretation issues with respect to a particular transaction. And till I take a decision one way or the other, either I just close my eyes and say, okay, tax, pay kar do and go the safe side. That doesn't solve the problem actually going forward. So we paid the taxes. We did not keep the exchequer in any mistake. And then we put in our contention specifically saying that this is what we feel is the right position. And it's irrespective of what was the outcome of that transaction, but we did end up getting a refund. So what I'm trying to say is that the boards at every level are cognizant of this. We are using AI for our prediction to understand we are not doing away with expert opinions, because ultimately, as Sir said here, that AI can be used for an analysis. It can be used for a prediction. It's not going to replace the judgment. It's not going to replace the experience totally. So we are very cognizant to answer your question, and risk committees, audit committees, under the board committees are very granularly assessing these situations. Yes.
Being as a, while working with the organizations, like you are a director of the bank, so we as a practitioners or consultants, we जो हम बात कर रहे हैं, that is only restricted to the tax heads or maybe to the CFOs. What's the role of, because directors are most of the time is into the business side, right? So how much weightage is being given from your side on these tax parts or to the GST, or like you have mentioned that to take the call or not to take the call? So how it is being decided, because we feel was ये issue तो CFO पे ही खत्म हो जाएगी, CFO ही decision ले लेगा. And as a director of the bank आपको लगता है कि नहीं, मेरे को तो business के volume समझने हैं, operations कहाँ जा रहे हैं, business कहाँ जा रहे हैं, because ultimate responsibility of the board is कि business grow होगा तभी चीजें होंगी. When something happened wrong, then directors are being held accountable. Can you put a light on that?
I'll answer your question very specific. You're right. Board as an entire set of people has the first sort of vision to see how board strategies for business, etc. are working. But since you are aware about that, you would also know that board has board committees under it. Each committee has a very specific focus and very specific role responsibility model. And although the CFO is the last person tax consultant would end up going, but the CFO has to completely explain all of that at some point of time to the audit committee. Whenever there is any discussion point where a tax understanding of which areas are gray areas, interpretation issues could exist in certain categories, and explain that either he or she himself or then herself, or through an external expert or a tax expert that is onboarded for the purpose or as an advisor exists in the organization, how their opinion is coming from. The internal auditor and statutory auditors also do their respective duty by analyzing these areas. And then in most big organizations, like for example the bank, we always have a tax consultant who is responsible for the final tax filings, whether in the indirect area or the direct area. And as part of the exercise of due diligence, at least once a year, the audit committees prefer the cost auditors, the internal auditors, the statutory auditors. This is the non-listed ones. The listed ones will do it quarterly. They will want the auditors to interact with the audit committee. Very recently, although we are digressing from the GST and the tax issue per se, but very recently, I think you are aware that NAFRA came out with that circular of rules, charge and governance criteria. So, as it is, audit committee was always responsible for the those charged with governance. Now they've extended it to the board also. So, in many organizations, the board has cognizantly said that okay, the buck will stop at audit committee because they are the members who understand exactly what is being said, and they will provide that comfort to the board. In many organizations, they have now said that the auditors are free to seek an appointment and come to the board if they feel that the audit committee has not gone ahead and solved their problems the way they were supposed to have. So to answer your question even more specifically, the board, through its committees, in most cases, and in some cases directly, gives enough cognizance to all issues related to any regulation. And tax is one major such regulation, direct as well as indirect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So I'll have my next question with Pushpendra. So as many CFOs face the problem of cost cut, many CFOs are evaluating AI agents that can independently prepare returns, identify compliance gaps, monitor tax risk on continuous basis. What should CFO consider before relying on AI for such critical tax functions? And what should be the human oversight remain mandatory?
Thank you, Priyanka, for this very pragmatic question. And good evening, all of you. I think we've been hearing AI since inception of this conference, and I would also have the point of view that AI can automate compliance, but it cannot own the accountability. Right? I think Ma'am also concluded the same. Honorable Justice talked about it. When Kuman sir spoke about it, Leonard sir also. So I think that's the thing. Tax matters which are very intricate, be it direct or indirect, invariably involve human judgment, because a lot of contextual fact specific things that you need to pay attention to. Those are dependent on your experience and the business context, not the algorithm that can help you. And when I'm saying that, I'm saying with responsibility that a lot of high-pitched mismatches under GST law, especially 2A and 3B mismatch or ITC mismatch will come up. And those are quite a few times with the help of AI tool from the department side. But when we slice and dice, pay heed to it as to how come is such a big difference. Have I really taken ineligible ITC and all? Then we have found in practical cases that some adjustments which are not there into system, but which are very much allowed within the four corners of law. Say to give a context, some credit which is being pushed to the subsequent year because you did not pay for it, but law mandates you to take the credit as soon as you make the payment later. So those kind of adjustments are not there when notice was generated, but when we slice and dice put those adjustments in place, we find out actually there is no excess credit that has been taken. So the point is, the takeaway, in the interest of time, I will say that AI is not to be put on like autopilot. it should be put on co-pilot. The human intelligence and artificial intelligence, I think we need a time where amalgam of the two should take place. And the future is HI and AI. HI means human intelligence, and AI is artificial intelligence, obviously, should work in tandem, in coherence, where AI can help us with speed and scale, and human can help us with the judgment and the kind of context, so that we can get the best of both the worlds. Because we've been hearing the instances that somebody suggested that we should have specified database for legal matters, so that quality of artificial intelligence output is enhanced. Nonetheless, human touch, I think, is invariably required. My take is it has to go in tandem.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So,
अमरजीत जी आपके लिए एक सवाल है सर when we have seen CP Gram role as you mentioned in terms of so specifically as a thin line of difference one which people generally ask me is our refunds are pending since long either from the income tax or from the GST point of view. How far is the data which comes to you that these are the refunds which are pending because refunds is something very critical for the industry. So if you can just put a light in terms of and what role you play in terms of in fastening up the process so that people from the industry can understand and see CP Gram as one of the a mediation role to fasten up their process before the order.
So, what refunds are pending, what data हमारे as a DGT हमारे पास ऐसा कोई data तो नहीं आता है, but whenever there is a grievance saying that refunds are pending, so that the grievant gives some detail. So we analyze that detail and we see the response of the formation. This is what we do, and we see that the response is evasive and not there is no commitment in that, there is no timeline and there is no valid reason. So we really take up the matter with the concerned formation at the level of Chief Commissioner also. So if something is not happening because of some lethargy or something, we take it very seriously.
And in the past, your experiences, because as you mentioned in your discussion initially, that on an overall level, India level, the CP Gram, what is the quantum of things which are happening and how the answer or reply is being given. So do you see that you act as a point of action intersection when you see that yes, this is not happening because of just a procedural delay, and you may have some. So any experience will give us some light on it.
So I would be pleased to share with you that now since the CP Gram culture has started, so people have, wherever there is a refund application pending with no legitimate explanation, departments have really come forward and they have disposed of all these cases. But I have also seen people using the CP Gram as a tool wherein that I have filed my CP refund application today and the next day I have filed CP Gram. So in those cases, we also see that when we look at each one has two multiple aspects. So we'll see, we'll examine the issue from all the possible aspects, and wherever there is something lacking from the department, we take it very closely and we monitor it very closely. And that has actually given us good result.
Good, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Siddharth Sinha ji and Prinika Gupta ji for moderating this session. Now to turn to facilitate our guest, the panelists. So first of all, I request Mr. Lalit Arora ji or Ashu ji, he come on the dais and give a moment to do. Sri Amarjit Singh ji, IRS. Ashu ji है? I said please. एकता जी से रिक्वेस्ट करूँगा वो मंच में आए और हमारे जो आज के जो पैनलिस्ट हैं श्री नीरज प्रसाद जी IRS प्लीज, आशुष जी अभी आप भी आ जाइए, एकता जी और आशुष जी। हमारे श्री रजत मित्तल जी एडवोकेट लोकर्स के लिए मैं विकास तिवारी जी को इन्वाइट करना चाहूँगा। विकास तिवारी जी हैं इधर? बस इसके बाद नेक्स्ट सेशन है वो मतलब 25-30 मिनट का है, उसके बाद हाईटी है, तो आप हाईटी के बाद ही जाए तो अच्छा लगेगा। थैंक यू वेरी मच। कपिल जी देवेंद्र जी भी उनके स्वरूप मंच पर है। बेनी थापा जी के लिए जो डायरेक्टर बंधन बैंक है, और मैं बेनी जी का एक आभार इसलिए व्यक्त करना चाहूँगा, जब भी मैं फोन करता हूँ तो बेनी जी जब भी समय होता है दिल्ली में होंगे तो जरूर आऊँगी, तो मैं चाहूँगा कि एक बार जोरदार तालियों से बेनी जी का भी स्वागत कर दूँगी। तो हमारे मैं बैंक ऑफ महाराष्ट्र डायरेक्टर था, तो आप बैंक में डायरेक्टर थी, तो इसलिए एक बार आपके स्वागत के लिए इन्वाइट करना चाहूँगा भूमिका जी और दीक्षा, दोनों आप आइए। कभी इधर आओ ना, एक मिनट ये इधर इधर आइए। और सीए डॉक्टर पुष्पेंद्र दीक्षित जी जो वाइस प्रेसिडेंट है, ग्लोबल वाइस प्रेसिडेंट है, ग्लोबल हेड टैक्स हेड PVR यूनिवर्सिटी। नो डाउट PVR में सभी लोग जाते होंगे, तो मैं पुष्पेंद्र जी कहूँगा कोई टिकट लेगी तो कुछ डिस्काउंट दे देगा तो बताइए, तो मैं आज घोषणा कर देता हूँ तो कुछ तो फायदा मिला आपका, तो इसलिए मैं जमशेद जी हैं हमारे बीच में, आप आएंगे तो अच्छा लगेगा, आप उनका सम्मान करिए। और देवेंद्र जी हैं, अच्छा हाँ कोई बात नहीं, मैं तो यही बेनती ये वाला है कि बात को कहाँ कैसे पहुँचाना है, तो सर प्रीवियस हो तो हमारे जो पैनलिस्ट उनको आप इनवाइट जरूर करिए। मैं पुष्पेंद्र जी आपने बताया कि प्रीवियस को भी इन्वाइट करेंगे आप। थैंक यू थैंक यू थैंक यू थैंक यू थैंक यू पुष्पेंद्र जी। और वैसे भी मेरी जी भी CA है, मैं भी चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट है, और आप हमारे माननीय IRS साहब हैं, तो IRS और चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट का वीडियो बना जाता है, तो आप भी सर रहेंगे तो अच्छा लगेगा। हमें बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, थैंक यू। और हमारे बीच में मॉडरेटर हैं CA गुप्ता जी, उनके लिए मैं निवेदन करूँगा। आदित्य राज जी हैं क्या, चले गए? आदित्य है क्यों? देवदी दत्ता जी, सॉरी निखिल, देवदी दत्ता निखिल जी आए और उनका सम्मान करें, एक मोमेंटो भी दें। और नो डाउट सबसे लास्ट में बुला रहा हूँ मैं, लेकिन इन्होंने बहुत अच्छा मॉडरेट किया, आपने भी किया और हमारे सीनियर साहब ने भी किया है। बहुत ही यंग चैप है और एडवोकेट ऑन रिकॉर्ड है, मेरे यहाँ पहली बार आए ऑफिस में तो मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा आपसे मिलकर, तो आपका ही बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, स्वागत। आप आइए, आपके स्वागत के लिए आइए, इधर आइए। रणदीप जी और कपिल जी आप आइए। अनिल जी आप आ जाइए, अनिल सिंह अनिल सिंह जी मोमेंटो दें और आप रणदीप जी को दे देंगे और कपिल जी को सही करेंगे। थैंक यू सभी का, आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। और एक ग्रुप फोटो के लिए रणदीप जी यही जाओ, आप सर आइए ग्रुप फोटो के लिए। उसके बाद लास्ट सेशन की हम तैयारी करेंगे। या लास्ट सेशन जो हमारा बेनिफिटरी है, इसमें हमारे सुप्रीम कोर्ट के जज साहब आ रहे हैं और एएसजी सर बैठे हुए हैं, विक्रम जी। एक बार जोरदार ताली से सर का स्वागत करेंगे इस बात का। और बड़े संतोषी से आपके लगे मुझे, और मैं चाहूँगा आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, आप आए, समय से आए, आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर। अभी इसके बाद सेशन आपका शुरू होगा। थैंक यू सर। सभी का एक बार बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, थैंक यू सर। और थैंक यू सर भी है, मैडम भी है, क्योंकि दो मैडम हमारे पीछे पहली थापर जी और प्रियंका गुप्ता जी, दोनों मैडम का भी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आपकी सर। थैंक यू सर। एक अब बस 5 मिनट बाद हम ये सेशन शुरू करते हैं, लास्ट सेशन है। प्लीज सब लोग अगर रहेंगे तो बहुत अच्छा लगेगा और आपको भी बहुत अच्छा लगेगा कि जो अच्छे अच्छे स्पीकर होंगे हमारे पास। थैंक यू। थैंक यू। अभी आपसे थोड़ा आपके साथ बैठेंगे और बैनी से कोई क्वेश्चन पूछ रहा हो तो बैनी जी पास में भी रहेंगे, 5 बजे के आसपास रहेंगे, तो कोई क्वेश्चन उनसे पर्सनल पूछ सकते हैं। मतलब अभी क्या है कि सेशन में लिमिट होती है, टाइम की लिमिट भी होती है, तो बैनी जी रहेंगे हमारे बीच में और भी जो हमारे गणमान्य स्पीकर हैं वो भी रहेंगे। तो आप जब बहुत सारी लाइब्रेरी में गलत हो गया, जो हमारा IT का होगा उसमें आप क्वेश्चन कर सकते हैं कोई भी। और हमारे बीच में राजेंद्र जी भी हैं जो होटल मैनेजमेंट काम देखते हैं, कहीं दिल से देखते हैं। तो राजेंद्र जी आपका भी बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। थैंक यू।
I would request all the guests to be seated. Honorable Mr. Justice Sanjay Sachdeva and Shri Vikramjit Banerjee are ready. Now I would request both the dignitaries to grace the class. I would also request Mr. Siddharth Sinha to come on rise. We have reached to the valedictory session of this event, a day-long event, where we have navigated into almost all the contemporary trajectories of goods and service tax rate. The preceding session was engaging and intellectually nourishing, I am told. Now, in this session, I would first request Shri Vikramjit Banerjee, the Litigation Solicitor General, to deliver his address. Sir would be entailing us on certain final aspects of law, and more than law, how the economic rationale of legislation has unfurled so far. There are certain unique things which I must indicate at the outset before Sir commence and deliver his address. Although both the distinguished speaker, including our Chief Guest Honorable Justice Sanjay Sachdeva, needs no introduction, we indeed feel indebted to both of them for saving time for us to be here. Mr. Vikramjit Banerjee has completed his law from National Law School of India, University, Bangalore. Thereafter, a master's in law from abroad. He has a distinction of practicing in various high court at the same point of time, and has a fairly busy practice at his time, and thereafter he became Additional Solicitor General in 2014. Today, sir is the senior most ASG in the Supreme Court of India. When the GST legislation has come to fore, there were certain formidable cases on taxation. Sir has first-hand experience in that sense of making the legislation to get matured. So it is that seeding backdrop with which Sir would be engaging us with his intellectual insights. Sir, please.
Thank you. I don't know how much of the introduction I deserve. Honorable Justice Sachdeva, Honorable Mr. Agarwal, my good friends Anurag and Siddharth, and thank you for inviting me to this wonderful program. And I think that Anurag gave you a wonderful introduction to me and made out as if I was responsible for literally the GST regime. I was not. I was just playing my part as a lawyer to defend the government's position in court. And I must confess, and I confess to Justice Sachdeva and Anurag and my friend Siddharth knows of it very well. I come from a public law background, and tax is not my great forte. But during those tumultuous days when GST was formed, there weren't that many tax ASTs in the Honorable Supreme Court. So there is that wonderful saying of Napoleon, which says, "Some are born great, still others become great, still others have greatness thrust upon them." So, I had no other option but to handle GST matters. So that's how I came into GST matters, and we did, at that point of time, I recall, we did fight a lot of very interesting GST issues, but they were at the formation stage. So they were largely criminal actions. Because if you recall, especially at the time of COVID, there were a lot of these evasion of GST issues and criminal matters which came up to the Supreme Court. I was involved in that, which involved a lot of these other issues as to whether the regime was followed, what sort of filings had to be done, whether there was evasion, and to that extent, yes, we did fight that, but it was at the formation stage, and I think at a mature stage of the GST as you see it today, I think Mr. Venkatraman, who addressed you, is a great expert, and we all look up to him in the Supreme Court for his knowledge and deep knowledge of tax. So if you are expecting any deep knowledge of tax or anything, and I'm in front of experts, they're all wonderful commissioners and people with very eminent positions of banks, etc., etc. Wrong person. But however, I will, as a lawyer who's handled these issues, I will just flag 2 or 3 issues where I think litigation has arisen and what I think is a solution for all of them. One is someone who deals as a litigation person in these sort of matters. One of these issues which I see is the issue of, whether credit is given and whether credit goes to the right persons. I think that's a huge dispute which we see today. There are whole loads of disputes which arise, and whether credit has been duly given, whether credit has not been duly given. I think what it needs to be done is, we discuss in court whether the deposit has been correct, whether the person who received has indeed deposited the money and all this. But I personally think a lot of litigation per se could be avoided if the rules were to some extent simplified. But these are my views. I'm not representing the government when I say this. I'm speaking as a litigation lawyer who deals with this and largely on behalf of the state. We contest it very hard, but I think there have been attempts, as we all know, to simplify those issues. We're coming up with rules, but I think the simpler the sort of compliance, the better. The other major issue which we face every day, and which I'm sure is also something which you face, is the question of tariff classification. That's a litigation area which we also face. And I think also because, which head and things of that sort, the solution would be again similar, would be to possibly simplify as much as possible. But these are largely on policy issues, and I think we leave it to the experts. But both on who should get the credit and what sort of tariff classification there should be, the simpler it is, the easier for compliance. As lawyers, we know it's like whenever disputes like this arise, then you just throw the ball up in the air, argue as hard as possible, and you hope that it comes towards your side. Or you hope that you get through what you are saying. But these are usually nitpicking arguments saying this is why the classification should happen and this is why it shouldn't happen. So to that extent, if the rules are simplified, it may not allow for these sort of disputes to arise. And we do, on one side, as you know, and I'm sure it's been discussed in the morning, face a lot of problems in this area. So a lot of litigation which are completely unnecessary. Another issue which we face and which we face every day, I take Siddharth's help, who's been very kind enough to help me, Mr. Siddharth Sinha, in some of the matters which I do in court, is related party transactions. We have, again, extremely variable case to case, but again, it would be better that we have clarity both in terms of the law, in terms of the government, also clarity in some sort of judicial pronouncements. because there seems to be, at least from my side, as a litigating lawyer, without a background in great amount of background in taxation, there seems to be conflicting views on that. There seems to be conflicting views of various different high courts. So, I take the help of Siddharth quite frequently because he's quite an expert on this, but we do face problems when we argue the matter. And it would be better if there was some clarity. I've seen that the Finance Act of 2026 seems to have made it sound sort of easier for the purposes of compliance. It's strictly diluted that supply agreement and et cetera, burden on the taxpayer has become less. But as a lawyer, we would have, we would expect that, even from the government side, that it becomes a little more clear. The other are, the everyday areas which are contested very frequently in the court, and these are again very nitpicky areas, is retrospective cancellation of registrations. We've seen that happens quite often, very hotly contested, but it could be easily handled if again some sort of working with the government and some sort of and to be fair, the courts have always taken equitable interpretation towards such cases, retrospective cancellations come down hard on us, which is very difficult for us when you appear on behalf of the state. But once in a stage like this, when you discuss the equities, it's possibly a correct stand. Don't quote me on it, but we do face a lot of these issues, and obviously these are important issues for us, and a lot of revenues at stake, so we sort of contest it. The other is, of course, flawed notice and delay in notice and stuff like that. Again, hotly contested. Courts usually take a stand which is against us, but again, this is something which I think could be avoided. The other issue is, of course, the limitation period. We contest it very often, fraud, suppression, and this, I think, even if the courts push back against us, this will always remain. Because if I want to open your books, that's the easiest way to do it. I will say there's misrepresentation, all the facts were not disclosed. But it is what it is. I think this is more of some sort of action on the administrative side, on the revenue side, on the revenue administration side, and there should be possibly clarity within the department and objective criteria as to which cases to take up and which cases not to take up. The other issues which I sort of deal with every day and which I think arises every day is constitutional issues as to whether the state has jurisdiction or whether central GST has jurisdiction, whether the sales tax, or which comes in the previous regime, who has what. These things I think needs to be sorted out, and I think, again, a little bit of government work, but I think also a nudge from the courts will possibly help the regime. I have, in conclusion, as a litigation lawyer, that's my take on more or less the subject which I was speaking about. But I have two clear sort of suggestions, and again, I speak not as the Additional Solicitor General representing the government's point of view, but as GST lawyer in Supreme Court handling such matters and appearing on behalf of the state, on behalf of the revenue number of occasions. The tendency today to reduce pendency in court is to go for a one-time guillotine. We use that, we increase the threshold level on which you can file appeals, but that works as a one-time guillotine to check all matters. But I have two suggestions in that place. One is possibly a board which takes a decision whenever you want to file an SLP. Because as ASGs we have this problem when a lot of times we get opinions as to whether you want to file an SLP or not. We tend to sign on them because of course we have officials who come and tell us that if we don't do this, the entire economy of India is going to collapse. And we have this very often, they come in very persuasive. But according to me, I have seen higher officials are much more responsible, who are capable of taking decisions are much more responsible. They know which are issues which is worth pursuing and which are issues which are not pursued. So I would say possibly you can bring in the ASG to take a decision, but instead of sending it to the ASG to take a decision whether SLP is to be filed. Because this, at the level of the Supreme Court, is not only a question of a legal issue, but it also involves question of revenue policy. So a mixture of both would be helpful. What is the way to work around it? I don't know. Possibly have a board. That's what I could come up with, my suggestion, but if there are better ways, that would be. The last suggestion is if there are a lot of revenue officials which I saw on the list, and this is my view on them, if you think it does not serve revenue policy, don't push further. Accept it and move forward. And I think a lot of revenue officials are absolutely, completely reasonable, and I'm sure they can understand it and they can choose to push or not push wherever they want to. So, I expect it will be easier for lawyers, it will be easier for us, because sometimes we end up defending sometimes undefendable in court, because that's a call which is being taken. I'm not saying all our matters, Honorable Justice Sachdeva is here, and I don't want to, put a view in front of him saying that most of the matters which we pursue are not that good. I'm not saying that. I'm saying they're eminently defendable and they are great, and we have great cause, and huge amount of expenses are going to be incurred if we don't push our cases as we do. But nonetheless, this is to the commissioners, I think we all need to do so. Thank you for inviting me. It's such a pleasure, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, sir. Now, without coming in between the chief guest's speech, I would take fractions of minutes to revamp what all we have done in the morning for the consideration of our chief guest. This event has 6 sessions. It spanned from morning 10:15 to till now. In the inaugural session, there were certain big surveys. It was inaugurated by Honorable Justice Chitrapal. His Lordships have fundamentally flagged 3 aspects. One was that indiscriminate use of word tax terrorism is to be avoided. And there has to be a pragmatic evaluation of the genuine aspirations of a taxpayer and the legitimate rights or exercise of power by the revenue. In that context, he has highlighted 2 notes of caution for taxmen. One, that wherever there is a provisional attachment, it should be strictly construed to be within a year, unless of course fresh materials gives rise to new cause. But that tangent and rope is very narrow, and one should be little cautious in treating to that part. The third segment which his Lordships has indicated was that artificially one should not curate a writ petition as a substitute of appeal. The situations were different at earlier point of time when the tribunal was non-functional. Now today the tribunal is there, so a docket of High Court can be made manageable, and a constitutional court would be better equipped to decide constitutional or pure legal issues than the arcane reconciliation exercise, which is a fact-finding character, which could be best left to the Gestat. The President Gestat has indicated the kind of changes which have been brought to fore to make appeals before tribunal an easier way. The taxpayer-centric approach which he has adopted, and the manner in which almost more than 90,000 filings have taken place have been revamped. Then followed the speech by member Central Board for Indirect Taxes and Customs. Mr. Abhay Srivastava has spoken on technology or a use of technology in administering goods and service tax. This being a pan-India legislation, he has outlined how hassle-free mechanism is created. Of course, in in the initial phase there was some knee-jerk situation, but the manner in which it was countered systematically and institutionally were the important segment of his speech. Then followed the first session, first technical session so to say. Apart from the President GST, Sri J.K. Mittal, Senior Advocate, has in characteristics questionnaire form exhibited and to some extent lamented the manner in which the tax administration is acting to the prejudice of taxpayer, and his own set of expectations were unfurled from a constitutional courts when the remedies were instantly knocked out in the garb of existence of alternative remedies. Then followed another session which we described as CFO leadership in digital era. There are 4 participants from different multinational entities have put in attendance, and they have described the concerns faced by them and what are the legitimate expectations of a large taxpayer units from the tax department of the government. Then followed a detailed session of my GST refund team presentation. It has actually indicated that what should be the mechanism and the electronic navigation thereof to realize the refunds. Post lunch, we had a very engaging session with my Lord Justice Pratibha Singh and Sri N. Venkatraman, Additional Solicitor General. Justice Singh has given her journey to tax laws in 2 broad compartments, one in 2016 and another one in 2025. I would pause here for a moment. Possibly, when she has her first brush with the tax law as she has put in, prior to that, all the developments of tax regime was by my Lord Satdeva. His Lordship was heading the bench with Justice Ahmad, if I recollect it very correctly. We were the Raw Junior, still we are. And one of the fantastic decisions or the path-breaking determinations of core taxing principles have emanated in service law from His Lordship's pen. I can, without even referring to any note, takes to at least 10-15 decisions, but time is that short and here all are practitioners. Those are the imprinted words of law reports which ignites our head every day. So thereafter, Justice Pratibha Singh has taken over with Justice Sanjeev Khanna's bench. So she has indicated how at the initial phase of GST, the issues have came to fore and in what manner the court have provided a fillip or a soothing balm to the taxpayer, because the government was little engulfed in the knee-jerk situation as I have put it. In 2025, she has come on bench. Prior to that, Milords was hitting that bench. So thereafter is her journey which she has indicated. Mr. Venkatraman has had 7 pointers in his address, and those 7 pointers by and large covered every aspect which is of contemporary relevance to the practitioners. Then followed the session just gone by, navigating the new GST appellate landscape. In that session, and a leadership panel was also merged with that. So there, in that session, it was fundamentally indicated that how the industry can provide leadership, because GST is not only a tax compliance mechanism, it has direct linkage with the working capital of an industry. So for subsistence of any business, it is imperative that a necessary leadership is provided to the compliance as well as to mitigating the rigors of taxpayer without, of course, compromising the necessity of a public purse. Now that followed the keynote address. With that, I would take this honor and privilege of inviting our chief guest, Honorable Mr. Justice Sandeep Sachdeva. We all are here who have seen His Lordship's decisions over a period of time, but a formal, as such, no introduction is needed. But for my satisfaction, you can bear with me. Before I formally indicate there is one thing which I would like to begin at the outset. As a practitioner, when one argues a case, especially as a law junior like us, then there is a characteristic quality of my lord's decision making which I must emphasize on. He elevates our raw arguments not only to a level of proper comprehension, but to a level of inbuilt value in it. So, value making in counsel decision is my lord's art, which, if I go to a book which Justice Michael Kirby has written, A Matter of Judgment, it describes those characteristics which Milord's uplift to arcane legal arguments to a perceptible degree. His Lordships, as enrolled in 1988, he was designated as senior advocate in 2011. Immediately thereafter followed ascendance to bench. His Lordship was a judge of Delhi High Court till he was elevated, till he was transferred to Madhya Pradesh High Court and later on elevated as 29th Chief Justice of Madhya Pradesh High Court. And thereafter, my lords were ruling the bench of Honorable Supreme Court of India. In coming fraction of the days, we had a decision which upholds Gujarat's view on Section 16. So in the days to come, there are bound to be a pragmatic jurisprudence emanating from His Lordship's scholarship. And on the other side, my lords have completed his graduation in commerce from Sri Ram College of Commerce. Then followed the law from University of Campus Law Center, University of Delhi, which is alma mater for most of the outstanding lawmen of the day. With that, I would request His Lordships to do.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vikramjit Banerjee, Additional Solicitor General, Mr. Agarwal, Chairman CSR, Mr. Gupta, Mr. Mahani, Mr. Singh, Mr. Oja, dignitaries on the dais and off the dais. I know a tax summit, especially a day long, can be very taxing. So I'm not going to make it more taxing for you. And Mr. Oja just reminded all of us and relived the whole day's progress. You see, nearly a decade ago, we had a legislative shift, and the transformative economic journey was started with the introduction of the GST. The enactment of the 101st Constitutional Amendment dismantled a fragmented regime where the tax was imposed at several stages, at several instances. There was central excise, service tax, VAT, which were all on account of supply, composite contract, mutuality. We went into a situation of one nation, one tax. That's just the beginning actually. It promised a seamless common market, but brought with it complex statutory provisions, a rigid digital infrastructure, and steep learning curve of tax administration. Tax administration must never weaponize procedural mechanics at the expense of substantive justice and economic survival. We must protect primary compliant businesses from mechanical and arbitrary state action, and we must also ensure strict statutory enforcement of framework when the legislative intent is unambiguous. The GST landscape is no longer just an administrative challenge for accountants. It has become a rich, complex battlefield of constitutional law, statutory interpretation, administrative overreach that demand our sharpest litigation skills. And two finest examples are here in Mr. Banerjee and Mr. Oja, who benefited substantially from this tax regime. They're excellent lawyers, their assistance in court, they're very humble, has been immense. I remember Mr. Oja talked about my journey as a tax consultant. He would be there in and out virtually every day in several matters. And the benefit of such a thing is that it's a learning experience, especially when a new law is there. The lawyers teach the judges, and judges then lay down the law in terms of the assistance they've got. And if one looks at my journey, I have authored several judgments. And I must say, a credit of some of them definitely goes to Mr. Oja and Mr. Banerjee. You see, historically, our federal structure followed a strict demarcation of powers between List 1 and List 2 of the 7th schedule. The center taxed the manufacturing and services, state tax sales. But with the 246A amendment, the statute coming in, it completely disrupted this binary structure and unified it. While the GST Council serves as a cooperative federal body making recommendations under Article 279A, the Supreme Court in Mohit Minerals case held that the recommendations are only recommendatory and they are not binding. Ultimate power still lies with the legislature. Again, then comes with the conflict of state versus center. Moving from constitutional law to statutory mechanisms, the core taxable event under GST is supply, as defined under Section 7. The old concept of manufacture, sale of goods and provision of services have been subsumed into this singular all-encompassing term. But there are major issues which we have experienced over the years. The major was retrospective cancellation of GST registration. Under Section 29(2), the proper officer is empowered to cancel a taxpayer's registration. However, a troubling administrative trend emerged when the tax authorities routinely cancelled it retrospectively. I virtually would have about 10 to 12 cases every day where GST registration was cancelled retrospectively. Now, simply because a return was not filed within 6 months. So there are provisions in law which provide mandate a levy of a penalty if that return is not filed within time. Now that sort of implies that when there is a provision of a penalty, that means the penal consequences of cancellation should be the last resort, should not be the first resort. Now simply because a return is not filed, say for 6 months, they would cancel it and cancel it retrospectively. Now this has a cascading effect, as all of you know, that if the supplier's GST registration is cancelled, then the buyer will not be able to get the benefit, and similarly his supplier, because this is a complete chain gets broken. It triggers a chain reaction that automatically denies input tax credit to innocent bona fide buyers who purchase goods from the taxpayer years prior. But there are, you see, several issues. Sometimes what happens is that the officer goes to the spot and finds that there is no functional unit and cancels the registration retrospectively. We have to be alive to the situation that the country that we live in, we have small businesses, and all these small businesses virtually commence from their homes. A person would take a GST registration, start business from his home. When the business takes off 6 months, 1 year down the line, he will shift his premises to somewhere else, into a bigger place. He will continue to be tax compliant, but the proper officer goes and finds that the original place where his business was started is no longer a manufacturing unit, no longer a business unit. So he'll say, all right, cancel retrospectively with effect from 2017, because that's when the act came into place. Then we are today in the era of digitization. We can use technology. Today there was a session on technology. I don't know whether the subject was even touched upon or not. You see, everything today can be monitored. Now, take a situation where every raw material, the quantity of raw material is entered into a system. Of course, there will be some challenges, small businesses, exempt officers. But in case everything is entered into the system and the movement of the entire supply chain is monitored digitally, there will be no question of filing a return, there will be no question of tax evasion, there will be no question of a problem or a retrospective cancellation. But yes, that will then require honesty at all levels. We are looking at a system where probably this may happen in the future. As of now, small businesses, a small businessman says, look, I don't have a computer. But everybody today has a phone. I remember the day then that the demonetization happened. It happened overnight. The very next day, UPI was introduced in the country. And look where we are. I think this was 2018? 16. Before 2016, every time we would step out of the house, we look at our wallet and make sure that there is enough money to pull us through the day. Now we don't even carry a wallet, we just need a phone. Even if you missed out a phone, there are still ways and means of digital payments. Transformation has taken place. If GST transforms to that level, I think all these problems that the taxpayer face, the proper officer face, the administration face, I'm sorry, it might hit on some people's job, like you will not need a GST council, you will not need an appellate tribunal or a tribunal. But yes, that is a situation or an era that we are looking at. Then there were issues of principles of natural justice. Show-cause notices were issued. Several cases used to come before us where the show-cause notice would be cryptic. For the reasons stated underneath, there was nothing underneath. Please appear before the officer at the date and time mentioned. There was no date and time, there was not even name of an officer. So these were forms which were blank, which used to come every day. Mr. Oja used to try his level best to save them, but and then there were times when it would be digitally signed by GST, what was it, GST Council or what? It was a GST and network, yes. I've 2 years away has sort of paid my own bill. GST and network stamp digital signature was on every notice. So I asked the officers to tell us what was the reason. They said digital signatures have not been issued to officers. So every notice which goes will be bearing the seal. So that means we would not know whether there was any application of mine or not. And when a detailed itemized reply was filed, the prompt rejection would be not satisfactory. In some cases we found that one line would say that he has not filed his reply and the other would say reply has been considered not found satisfactory. That is the level of assessment and adjudication. Mr. Oja mentioned about appellate tribunal functional and powers of 2 to 6 court. You see, sometimes what happens is when you have to go in appeal, you have to make some pre-deposits. Now, if authorities have to make pre-deposits in cases like this, it can cause a major burden to smaller individuals. Mr. Banerjee just talked about the recent judgment upholding the constitutional validity of section 16(2). But again, all these things will be streamlined, helpful if we are able to streamline the system, where there is honest declaration of inputs, honest declaration of usage, and honest declaration of the output and supply and sales. I know it is very difficult, but like there's a poem in my school that I used to go to on Stopping by the Woods by Robert Frost. And the last paragraph of that said, the woods are dark, deep and lovely, but there are promises to keep and miles to go before I speak and miles to go before I speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your enlightening address. Now I would request Mr. Dinjay Lakawal to give a moment to and speak to us.
थैंक यू अनुराग जी, बहुत अच्छा आपने मॉडरेट किया और इस सेशन को बड़ा लाइव रखा। और मेरे ख्याल से ये लोग जो लंच के बाद है, ये लोग अभी भी हैं, ये हमारी बहुत बड़ी बात है कि भी ये लोग अभी भी रुके हैं, आप सुनने के लिए रुके हैं। तो आपका भाई बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। मैं ऑनरेबल जस्टिस मिस्टर संजीव सत्यार्थी जी को बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ कि वो इस कार्यक्रम में आए, हमारा उत्साहवर्धन किया और हमें आशा है कि भविष्य में भी आप हमें ऐसा सहयोग करते रहे, जब हम आपको याद करें तो ऐसा सहयोग करें। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, साधु थैंक यू। एक बार मैं सबसे चाहूँगा स्टैंडिंग और स्टैंडिंग करें प्लीज। सबको ऑनर करने के लिए मैं अंकुर चोपड़ा जी और डॉक्टर रचिता अग्रवाल कर्मा जी मोहम्मद टू जी सर का स्वागत करें और देवन जी आप भी साथ में असिस्ट करें। आइए। सर प्लीज आप रहें। Thank you. थैंक यू अंकुर जी। और हमारे जो ऑनरेबल एडिशनल सॉल्यूशन जनरल साहब हैं विक्रमजीत बनर्जी जी, बड़े स्माइलिंग फेस है उनका। मैं मिला पहली बार तो मुझे लगा नहीं सर इतनी बड़ी पोस्ट पे है, मतलब बहुत बड़ी पोस्ट है ये तो पूरे इंडिया के होते हैं, तो बड़ा लगा नहीं कि अपने कि भाई सर में मतलब इतनी बड़ी पोस्ट और बड़ा मतलब कहते हैं कि अपना महसूस हुआ मुझे सर, पता नहीं मुझे कैसा लगा। और स्माइलिंग फेस मतलब कुछ लेना भी नहीं तो यस कोई बात नहीं। तो मैं आपके स्वागत के लिए मैं चाहूँगा कि कपिल जी आए और देवन जी आए, तो आप उनको मोमेंट और ग्रुप फोटो भी सर को आते हैं। थैंक यू। एक ग्रुप आप सभी लोग आ जाए ग्रुप फोटो के लिए, अच्छा लगेगा। आप सभी लोग हमारी इसमें पता लगता है कि हमारी संख्या लास्ट में कितनी थी, शुरुआत में कितनी थी, लास्ट में कितनी थी, लंच से पहले कितनी थी, लंच के बाद कितनी थी। तो ये चार मनीष जी आप ऊपर आइए एक बार। सर नीरज जी सर आप नीरज जी आप आइए, अमन जी आप ऊपर आइए सर आइए। सभी का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, आभार और आशा है कि हम फिर कभी सेमिनार करेंगे, आप लोग सभी आएंगे। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर। मतलब आप चला जी आप चाय अब सभी आप हाईटी पे इनवाइट है, जहाँ उसी हॉल में लगा हुआ है हाईटी के लिए, प्लीज सभी लोग उधर है।